375 knights against 26,000 warriors. The mathematics of annihilation have never been clearer, and the kingdom of Jerusalem is hours away from extinction. But the 16-year-old leper king is about to prove that the side with more men doesn't always win. Sometimes wars are decided by the side that refuses to accept defeat. The year is 1177, and Baldwin IV, the so-called leper king, stares at a map of his crumbling domain and makes a calculation that will either save his kingdom or destroy it entirely. Outside these walls, 26,000 Muslim warriors under Sultan Saladin are pouring across the Sinai desert like a tidal wave, plundering every village between Gaza and Jerusalem. His main army is 300 kilometers north. The elite Templars are scattered. Baldwin has exactly 375 knights left in his entire kingdom. 375 armored men against 26,000. But Baldwin is about to break every rule of medieval warfare. What Saladin doesn't know is that this suffering teenager is about to make the most audacious tactical decision in medieval warfare. Baldwin rises from his chair, his movements slow and deliberate, because leprosy has already begun to eat away at the nerves in his legs. He calls for his advisors and issues an arriere ban, a general mobilization of every able-bodied man who can hold a weapon. Then he does something that violates every principle of siege warfare. He orders the gates of Ascalon thrown open. He is going to march his tiny force out into the open field to confront an army 50 times larger. His commanders stare at him in disbelief. This is a desperate gamble. But Baldwin understands something they don't. Saladin's massive host has dispersed into raiding parties around Ramla and Lydda, scattering across the countryside like locusts to plunder and pillage. The Sultan is so confident that the leper king poses no threat that he hasn't even bothered to post scouts near Ascalon. For the first time in this campaign, the tactical advantage belongs to the smaller force. The element of surprise is the only weapon Baldwin has left, and he intends to use it. And if Saladin discovers them before they reach his camp, every one of these men will perish. The smell of medicinal poultices clings to Baldwin's bandages as he mounts his horse with the help of 2 attendants. The 16-year-old king sits in shadow, his hands wrapped in linen bandages to hide the ulcerations that are slowly consuming his flesh. His hands can no longer feel the reins, so he grips them with muscle memory alone. The gates swing open with a metallic groan that echoes across the sand, and the Christian army begins its march northward along the coastal road. The November sun beats down on white mantles and gleaming mail. These are not fresh troops. Many of them are wounded veterans, garrison soldiers, servants pressed into service. But they move with the grim determination of men who know there are no reinforcements coming. If they fail, Jerusalem falls. If Jerusalem falls, the entire Crusader presence in the Holy Land collapses. Every step they take is a step toward either glory or annihilation, and there's no middle ground. 3 days into their march, salvation arrives from an unexpected direction. The gates of Gaza burst open, and 84 Knights Templar come thundering out in a desperate breakout maneuver. These are the shock troops of Christendom, warrior monks who have taken vows of poverty, chastity, and perpetual warfare against Islam. They wear white mantles emblazoned with red crosses, and they fight with a fanaticism that terrifies even hardened Saracen veterans. Leading them is Odo de Saint-Amand, the Grand Master of the Templars, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness is legendary, even among his own order. The Templars have been trapped in Gaza for weeks. but they have smashed through the Muslim siege lines, specifically to join Baldwin's dangerous march. Now, the Christian force numbers around 500 heavy cavalry. It's still not enough, not even close, but it's enough to make Saladin bleed. If you're enjoying this deep dive, hit that subscribe button, because what happens in the next 5 minutes is so brutal that medieval chroniclers struggled to describe it. We're covering the conflicts textbooks are afraid to show you. Subscribe now. The combined Christian army tracks Saladin's movements through informants and captured raiders. They learn that the Sultan has become overconfident to the point of recklessness. He has allowed his massive force to fragment even further, with units spread across a 30-kilometer front. His baggage train, laden with plunder from the ravaged villages, is mired in mud from recent rains near a place called Montgisard. The Turkish light cavalry that forms the core of Saladin's strength requires speed and maneuverability to be effective. In marshy terrain, they lose both. Baldwin sees his opportunity. He pushes his knights toward Montgisard at a punishing pace, gambling that he can catch the Sultan's army in disarray before it can consolidate. On the morning of November 25th, 1177, the Christian scouts bring word that they have visual contact with Saladin's camp. The enemy is less than 5 kilometers away, and they still haven't detected the Frankish approach. This is the moment. Everything depends on the next hour. Baldwin orders a halt. What happens next is a masterclass in psychological warfare. The king dismounts from his horse, and his attendants have to physically support him as his legs buckle beneath him. He drops to his knees in the mud before a wooden reliquary carried by the Bishop of Bethlehem. Inside that reliquary is a fragment of what the Crusaders believed to be the true cross, the actual wood upon which Christ was crucified. The bishop raises it high, and the November sun catches the gold inlay, sending shafts of blinding light across the assembled knights. Baldwin begins to pray aloud, his voice cracking but never faltering. He asks God for victory, not because he deserves it, but because the defense of Jerusalem is the defense of the Christian faith itself. Around him, 500 men drop to their knees. Veterans weep openly. The Templars begin chanting the Psalm of David, "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble." This is the secret weapon of the Crusaders. It's not their armor, though that is formidable. It's not their horses, though those destriers are trained war machines. It's their absolute conviction that they are fighting for the salvation of their immortal souls. Every Templar has taken a vow that forbids retreat. To fall in battle against the infidel is not defeat, but martyrdom, a guaranteed path to paradise. They look at their suffering king, a teenager whose body is rotting away, but whose spirit burns with divine fire, and they see proof that God works through the weak to humble the strong. They are no longer 500 individual warriors. They have fused into a single instrument of apocalyptic violence. When Baldwin rises to his feet and mounts his horse, they know what is about to happen will echo through the centuries. But they don't know that Saladin's deadliest weapon is about to appear on the battlefield. The Frankish army begins its advance at a trot. Ahead of them, Saladin's camp sprawls across the muddy plain in complete disarray. Tents are scattered. Horses graze unguarded. Supply wagons are stuck axle-deep in the mire. Many of the Sultan's soldiers are still sleeping or cooking breakfast. The few sentries who spot the approaching Christian force assume it's a raiding party and don't even bother to sound the alarm. By the time someone finally realizes that an entire army of heavy cavalry is bearing down on them at increasing speed, it's already too late. Saladin himself is conferring with his nephew Taqi ad-Din in the center of the camp when the first screams reach his ears. He rushes outside his tent and sees something that turns his blood to ice. The entire Frankish chivalry, spearheaded by the white mantles of the Templars, is charging directly at his position. They are maybe 2 kilometers away now, and accelerating. The ground beneath Saladin's feet begins to tremble with the thunder of 500 war horses in full gallop. But what the Crusaders don't know is that Saladin's personal bodyguard, 1,000 elite Mamluk slave soldiers, is camped nearby. These are not ordinary troops. Mamluks are captured as boys, converted to Islam, and trained from childhood to be the finest cavalry in the Muslim world. They fight with composite bows, curved sabers, and a discipline that rivals the Templars themselves. When the alarm finally sounds, they react with terrifying efficiency. Within 2 minutes, they have formed a defensive wall between the charging Franks and the Sultan's position. 1,000 Mamluks against 500 Crusaders. Under normal circumstances, this would be a fair fight. But these are not normal circumstances. The Crusaders have momentum, surprise, and religious fury on their side. The Mamluks are defending marshy ground where their horses struggle for purchase. The question is simple. Can 500 men break through 1,000 elite soldiers before Saladin's entire army wakes up? They have maybe 3 minutes to find out. When the two forces collide, the sound is like the crack of a thunderstorm. The Templars form the tip of the wedge, with Odo de Saint-Amand at the very point. These knights are riding destriers, war horses that weigh as much as 3 men and hit like a collapsing wall. The riders are encased in mail from neck to knee, with steel helmets and kite shields that can deflect arrows. Their primary weapon is the couched lance, 4 meters of destruction, held tight under the armpit, so that the full momentum of horse and rider is concentrated into a single point. When a charging destrier impacts at full speed, the kinetic energy is equivalent to a modern automobile collision. Shields shatter and explode into splinters. Mail splits open like torn fabric. Men are lifted off their horses and hurled through the air like broken dolls, their bodies twisting before they crash into the mud with bone-snapping force. The Templars drive into the Mamluk line like a battering ram through rotten wood. Blood sprays across white mantles. Horses scream. The air fills with the wet crunch of steel cleaving through flesh and bone. The Mamluks fight back with everything they have. Their composite bows can crack steel at close range, and they are masters of the feigned retreat, a tactic where they pretend to flee to draw the enemy into an ambush. But the marshy ground has robbed them of their greatest advantage, mobility. Their horses slip and founder in the mud. Their arrows lose effectiveness in the chaos of melee combat, where friend and foe are tangled together in a writhing mass of violence. And the Templars are not chasing them in pursuit. They are driving straight forward towards Saladin's personal standard in a concentrated thrust designed to decapitate the Ayyubid command structure in a single stroke. Taqi ad-Din, the Sultan's nephew, throws his own elite units into the fray, but the Frankish charge is relentless. The air fills with the screams of wounded horses, the clang of steel on steel, the guttural war cries of Deus Vult, God wills it. But momentum can't last forever, and they're about to hit the center of a 20,000-man army with nowhere to retreat. Behind the Templar vanguard, Baldwin IV rides into battle with bandaged hands that can no longer feel the grip of his sword. Leprosy has destroyed the nerve endings in his fingers, but his hands still obey his will through sheer force of habit. He swings his blade in wide, brutal axe, and men fall before him. Blood soaks through his linen bandages, turning them crimson. His bodyguards fight like demons to keep the enemy away from their ailing king. But Baldwin refuses to stay in the rear. He pushes forward, deeper into the carnage, because he knows that his presence here, now, in the thick of the slaughter, is the only thing holding his army together. If the leper king can fight, then so can every man under his command. The sight of their monarch, a teenager whose body is failing but whose spirit will not break, transforms the Christian army into something more than human. His bodyguards know the truth. If the king falls here, the kingdom falls with him. But transformation won't be enough, because the Templars have just spotted Saladin's personal tent, and it's surrounded by his inner circle. Answer this. If you were commanding Saladin's forces at this moment, with your army scattered and the enemy inside your camp, what would you do? Would you try to rally your troops for a counterattack, or would you cut your losses and retreat? Drop your answer in the comments, because this exact decision determined the fate of Jerusalem for the next decade. The Crusaders smash through the Mamluk guard and penetrate deep into the heart of Saladin's camp. They are now surrounded by 20,000 enemy soldiers, but those soldiers are in complete disarray. Many of them are unarmed, having left their weapons in their tents. Others are still trying to saddle their horses, fumbling with straps and buckles as armored knights bear down on them. The Frankish knights exploit this chaos with ruthless efficiency, striking down anything that moves. Lances punch through backs, swords open throats, horses trample fallen men into the blood-soaked mud until the ground itself seems to scream. The fall of Ahmad, Taqi ad-Din's son, sends a shockwave through the Muslim ranks. His body is trampled beneath Frankish hooves, his skull crushed. His rich armor now, just scrap metal ground into the mire. If the nephew of Saladin's nephew can be defeated, then no one is safe. Panic, that most contagious of all battlefield diseases, begins to spread through the Ayyubid army like wildfire. Units that should be forming defensive lines instead break and run. The marshland that slowed the Mamluk counterattack now becomes a trap for fleeing soldiers who are cut down by the hundreds as they struggle through the mud. Their screams echo across the plain as the Crusaders chase them down and strike them from behind. Saladin himself stands at the center of this maelstrom, watching his elite bodyguard crumble before the Frankish onslaught. He can see the white mantles of the Templars cutting their way toward him, and he knows that if they reach his position, he will fall. Not captured. The Crusaders rarely take high-value prisoners alive. He will be run through with a lance or hacked down with a sword, and his head will be paraded through the streets of Jerusalem. The Sultan of Egypt and Syria, who came to conquer the Holy Land and unify Islam through jihad, will instead become a trophy for the leper king. Panic spreads through the Ayyubid ranks like plague, but Saladin himself still stands at the center of the carnage, watching the white mantles cut toward him, and he's making a decision that will define his entire legacy. In this moment, Saladin makes the hardest decision of his military career. He abandons his army. He strips off his heavy mail shirt to reduce weight, mounts a racing camel, and flees eastward toward the Egyptian border. Behind him, the Battle of Montgisard transforms from a tactical engagement into an industrial-scale slaughter. The Crusaders pursue the fleeing Muslims for kilometers, cutting them down until their swords are blunt and their arms are too tired to swing anymore. They don't stop when men beg for mercy. They don't stop when soldiers throw down their weapons. This is total war, and the Franks are extracting payment for every village burned, every Christian struck down, every raid on the kingdom. The marshy ground around Montgisard turns into a charnel house. Bodies pile up so thick that in some places you cannot see the earth beneath them. The smell of blood and open bowels hangs in the air like a fog. Flies swarm in black clouds. The mud is no longer brown but red, a glutinous mixture of earth and gore that sucks at the legs of horses and men alike. Of the 26,000 men Saladin brought across the Sinai, only 10% will make it back to Egypt alive. The rest are fallen, captured, or scattered across the desert to perish of thirst and exposure. It is one of the most lopsided defeats in medieval military history, a catastrophe that will haunt Saladin for the rest of his life. Baldwin IV returns to Jerusalem in triumph, but it is a hollow victory. He has lost 1,100 men, nearly half his total force. For a kingdom that is perpetually short of manpower, this is a crippling blow. He cannot replace those losses. There are no reinforcements coming from Europe. Every knight who fell at Montgisard is a hole in the kingdom's defenses that cannot be filled. To memorialize the battle, Baldwin orders the construction of a monastery dedicated to St. Catherine of Alexandria, on the exact site where his army broke the Ayyubid host. It is built from stone, a permanent testament to the day when 500 knights defeated 20,000. Today, you can still visit the ruins of that monastery and walk the ground where one of history's most impossible victories was won. You've heard this called the victory of 187 knights. That's a myth. The real number was closer to 500. Baldwin had 375 secular knights plus 84 Templars, for a total of around 460 heavy cavalry, supported by a few hundred infantry and light cavalry. The 187 figure likely comes from a textual error or a specific count of a single hospitaller contingent, but the real story is even more impossible. Saladin reaches Cairo on December 8th, having lost his treasure, his generals, and his prestige. The great unifier of Islam has been humiliated by a suffering teenager. It will take him years to rebuild his army and his reputation, but he will rebuild, and he will return. In 1187, a decade after Montgisard, Saladin will destroy the Crusader army at the Battle of Hattin and recapture Jerusalem. By that time, Baldwin IV will be gone, his body finally succumbing to leprosy at the age of 24. He will never see his kingdom fall, but his defense of Jerusalem in 1177 buys the Crusader states 10 more years of existence. Today, Baldwin IV stands as one of history's most remarkable examples of leadership under impossible circumstances. He ruled a kingdom from the age of 13, managing rival factions of French and Italian nobles while conducting a military campaign against the greatest Muslim general of the age. He did all of this while suffering from a disease that was slowly destroying his body, causing constant pain, progressive disfigurement, and the certainty of an early end. He could not feel his hands. He eventually went blind. In his final years, he had to be carried into battle on a litter because he could no longer ride a horse. And yet, he never surrendered, never gave up, never stopped fighting for his kingdom. When he passed in 1185, he left behind a legacy that continues to inspire military leaders, historians, and anyone who has ever faced impossible odds and refused to quit. The strategic map of the world is often rewritten by those who refuse to accept the inevitability of defeat. Montgisard is proof of that principle. 500 knights charged into the teeth of 20,000 warriors and emerged victorious, not because they were superhuman, but because they were willing to risk everything on a single, desperate gamble. That same dynamic plays out in every modern conflict, where a smaller force defeats a larger one through superior training, tactics, and morale. The tools change, the weapons evolve, but the fundamental truth remains. Wars are won by the side that refuses to break, no matter how bad the odds look on paper. If this story of impossible courage inspired you, make sure to subscribe so you never miss another deep dive into history's most incredible battles. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on Baldwin's tactics. Would you have made the same decision? And if you know someone who needs to hear this story of refusing to quit against impossible odds, share this video with them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.